Good morning and good afternoon to everyone that is joining us for our IURC webinar number 13. Please feel free to share in the chat where you are joining us from and your name. Before I start with the introduction, I would like to present myself briefly. I am Aurélie Knecht. I'm project officer for the IURC Latin America program. For the ones that don't know the program, are not so familiar with it. So it's the International Urban Regional and Cooperation Program that is funded by the European Commission, and it seeks to share best practices and exchange knowledge to foster the exchange of knowledge between cities and regions in Europe and Latin America. I am also in charge of facilitating the exchange of knowledge between Fortaleza and Essen that are present here today as part of our panel, and I'm really glad of it. So I will carry the moderation in English, but if you prefer to hear the webinar in Spanish or in Portuguese, you can choose different language channels at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so now let's start with the webinar. The main objective of this event is to open up a technical discussion on the provision of inclusive access to green areas in cities. So we have 3 international experiences present here in the webinar of Barranquilla in Colombia, Essen in Germany, and Fortaleza in Brazil, that will share their learnings on the creation of microparks and the implementation of green strategies with a strong participatory methodology and community engagement approach. So we will discuss these aspects today to highlight opportunities and challenges linked to these kinds of interventions. Before beginning with presenting shortly our agenda and panelists, I would like to highlight the relevance of the discussion that we are opening up today. As in dense urban contexts, access to green spaces and nature tends to be limited, and especially in poorest neighborhoods. In this regard, taking advantage of existing vacant or underused spaces can allow to create new opportunities for citizen engagement and contribute to increased quality of life and biodiversity, as well as participates to the education of communities around nature and related thematics. In addition, the implementation of pocket parks, tiny forests, or other typologies of limited size green spaces requires less time and investment than larger parks or interventions, which can facilitate their application on a city scale and maximize their impact and social benefits. So as mentioned, the session today is meant to open up a lively discussion to share thoughts and ideas around democratizing the access to green spaces in cities. Therefore, we kindly ask you to write your questions and comments in the Q&A section that is at the bottom of your screen to feed the debates and share your ideas, and we will try to answer them during the webinar. So let's get over the agenda very briefly. So Manuel Trujillo will share the experience of Barranquilla first, then we will have Victor Macedo and Luciana Mendes that will share the experience of Fortaleza. And last but not least, we will have Jonathan Walgenbach sharing Essen's experience. And the last part of the session will be dedicated to Q&A and discussion about our learnings. So I just wanted to share again that you can listen to the webinar in Spanish or in Portuguese for the ones that just joined us now, with the language channel at the bottom of your screen. So now let's start with the interesting part, the presentations. So first, Manuel Trujillo will open up the discussion. He has a master in public administration from the London School of Economics and is a political scientist from the University of Pennsylvania. He has extensive experience in strategic planning, public policy, and international cooperation. Within his professional experience, he has served as financial and operations director of Endeavor Colombia, is senior advisor to the Presidential Cooperation Agency in Colombia, and a research associate of the Committee for Economic Development in Washington, D.C. So Manuel, thank you so much for being here. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Audeli, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Edgardo, and all the IURC team for inviting Barranquilla to participate in this very interesting webinar. And I'm very excited about telling you about our project called Todos al Parque. This is a project that is very close to our heart, not only mine, but I think of several people in the local administration, in the mayor's office of the city of Barranquilla. So we're very excited, especially because recently we just won an award from the World Resource Institute called Prize for Cities. We won the grand prize among 155 cities that were competing. And we got the prize this year for the most urban transformative project during COVID times. So it was very interesting to see how this project was particularly relevant coming out of the pandemic and the potential that it has for replicability in other Latin American cities. I think that's really what makes it a winning project, that I think other cities will be able to look at this and see that they can do it too. So I'll show you a presentation, which is rather long, so I'm gonna skip several slides as I go through it. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Should be, yeah. Okay, so as I was telling you guys, Todos al Parque, this is our case study for this project that basically involves it's a green public space project that's been going on for over a decade in the city of Barranquilla. So a little bit of context. Barranquilla is the fourth largest city in Colombia. We are at the very northern tip of northern part of Colombia, in the Caribbean, next to the Caribbean Sea. And we have around 1.3 million people in our urban area and over 2 million people in our metropolitan area. But the story of Barranquilla is a story of a city that has really transformed itself. 15 years ago, Barranquilla was suffering from a wide range of problems. For example, what you're seeing in the screen right now is a photo of flash floods that would happen all the time here in Barranquilla, and as a city, we weren't able to tackle this problematic. So 15 years ago, these pictures here were very common, and whenever you have this very dense rainfall, the city was completely paralyzed, and accidents would happen, and material damages, and sometimes lives even would be affected by this type of problems. Our educational infrastructure was, as you can see in the picture, was very poor, and the quality of the education was very low, a very low coverage rate nationally. This is a photo, for example, of a health center. Again, poor infrastructure being a common denominator. And of course, public space. This is some pictures of how the public space was, how you could see it in Barranquilla 15 years ago. Very little access for the communities, a problem of connectivity with lack of roads to these public spaces, and a lot of insecurity attached to them. The quality was very poor, and because we have a very harsh climate, a very tropical climate, the infrastructure would deteriorate very quickly. And now on the right side, you can see some of the pictures of the new parks that we've been building with this project of Todos al Parque. So on the left side, you'll see the before, and in the right side, you'll see the after. And as you can see, the difference is very telling. So as a whole, Barranquilla was a city that was in a very difficult situation over a decade ago. We had healthcare problems, education problems, poverty level was around 45%, low road connectivity, the flash floods during the rainy seasons. And we also had this challenge to renovate its public spaces and create a public park system. So in a way, when we look back to 2010, 2011, when the beginnings of Todos al Parque was being conceived, we saw how this solution, recovering public spaces and creating a public park system, could in one way or another contribute to tackle all of these problematics in one way or another. We could see how recovering public spaces wasn't just about recovering a park and making it pretty for people in the neighborhood to visit, but it was also a matter of giving access to communities, to education, to healthcare, to recreation opportunities, to safer areas in their city. So in a way, these public spaces became hubs for the city's progress that is now evident 15 years later. So this is how it started in 2011 with an agreement basically at the local level to guarantee the maintenance of the parks and to establish a committee that would oversee this. So this was, like, I would say, the first step. And this would include several minimums, that all these interventions would include, for example, security cameras, would include park rangers, it would have enough green areas, it would include playgrounds for children, and that we would follow a highly participatory approach with the community to build these parks and to recover these public spaces. So this is generally a timeline of how it started and where we are now. And I'll just mention a few of the points. As I mentioned, 2011 was when we started with the local public policy agreement. But then in 2012, for example, this is a story that I really like telling because we have a sister city in the US called Tampa. And Tampa is huge on parks. They perhaps a lot of you don't know it, but Tampa has a lot of green infrastructure, and we went there in 2012. Not me, other people, and they learned about this experience on parks and the type of infrastructure that we could use, how to maintain, how to do the proper maintenance, the type of governance arrangements that we had to conduct internally to make this program feasible. And we learned a lot from that experience. So I think altogether, Todos al Parque is also a good example of how twinning and sister cities works really well. Then in 2013, we started with our first pilot project. We saw that it went really well and that the community was asking for more interventions. And then by 2015, we have 52 renovated parks. Then by 2017, we have El Gran Malecón, which is a signature river walk project that is 5 kilometers long, and it's probably our biggest park, so to speak. In 2017, again, the community was really appropriating these places. Then in 2018, we have a change in the way we organize ourselves with the creation of Siembra Barranquilla. I'll tell you more about it later. And then now we are at the very end, but I wouldn't say the end. We are evolving this strategy, this park strategy. We started small, we started with community parks, but now we're talking about building an eco park, which we're launching in the middle of this year, 2023. And we're also talking about urban forests and bigger projects as the initiative has grown more ambitious. So altogether, it's 288 interventions. Out of these 288, I would say around 260 are parks. This has far surpassed our initial goal, and it has made Barranquilla the capital city of parks in Colombia. And these red dots that you see in the picture, these are the location of all these interventions, of all these parks. So as you can see, they have been constructed and built pretty much everywhere across Barranquilla, which was one of the things that I think is very important to mention, because this is guaranteed universal access to all parts of the city. And actually, we started in the most vulnerable areas of town, especially the southwestern part of Barranquilla is generally the most poor and the most deprived of economic opportunities. the southern area as well. So we started from there, and then we expanded the model, and now the model is all over the city. And now we can say that 93% of people who live in Barranquilla have access to a park within an 8-minute walk or less. So in a way, it has been accessible for all citizens of Barranquilla, and the impact has really been for the entire population of the city. So now these are some pictures that I'll show you quickly. How we are migrating now from smaller neighborhood parks to bigger, large scale metropolitan parks, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to keep doing the smaller parks. It just means that we're now able to tackle bigger challenges, so to speak. And we're now working on an urban forest, our first of 5 that we plan to leave during this administration. And the eco park of Ciénaga Mallorquín, which will be ready this year, the first phase of. It's also a big project that will have 5 phases, and the first one will be inaugurated this year. But and this slide just basically shows, I think, what everybody here knows. What are the impacts of parks and green spaces? Healthy lifestyles. It strengthens the local economy. It also increases resilience to climate change, because we are tackling, for example, erosion and soil erosion and tree planting, for example, as well as strengthening the social fabric of the city. So these are just like, it seems very obvious, right? That you want to, that it has all these benefits, and sometimes you just have to do a cost benefit analysis, and you realize that the benefits of having these type of green spaces drastically outweigh the costs of building them. This is another a graph that shows how we changed from 2011 to 2021, basically tripled the amount of public space available in Barranquilla, and the heavier emphasis on green areas, of course, when doing these interventions. And these are the key impacts of our program of Todos al Parque. As I was saying, 93% of all households in Barranquilla now have a renovated park just within an 8-minute walk. We have also seen that these parks in the areas that we've intervened, the real estate has obviously been boosted, the property value has gone up, but we have not seen gentrification, because as I was showing you, there are parks everywhere. So it really, it's not kicking someone out from one area to another. It's just people, their property values go up. And what we have seen anecdotally is that people actually invest more in their own properties, and to, for example, they make sure that they open up a small business near the park, or they paint their facade, the walls of their houses, and they see how this investment in their community, they can also appropriate it, and it reflects in their own households even. And it has also increased our tax payment culture. So now we proudly say that the program finances itself, because basically at a starting point, tax evasion was extremely common in I would say in Colombia, but specifically in Barranquilla. But this helped boost tax payment culture, because it was very visible that people were seeing right in front of their houses how the public space was improved. So people automatically tax evasion was reduced, and the local administration was able to gather more income internally. We also did a study that I think is very interesting, and anyone who wants to read more on it is welcome to, but it's an internal study that we did with our economics team in the mayor's office. And we saw that in a radius of 200 meter radius around all these intervened areas, we would see a drop in crime rates. For example, 15% drop in crime rate for a 100-meter radius, and so on. So we were able to measure to how crime rates went down in these areas that were previously very insecure. They had poor lighting, but by making all these small investments, we were able to change the narrative and have an impact on something as key for all citizens, which is security. And a parks program having a direct effect on that is, I would say, also part of a winning strategy. And finally, another huge impact is the way that it changed the way we went about doing business, how we innovated in governance, and how we learned how to do civic participation properly. And I think this is very important. And I think perhaps this is the biggest lesson that we've learned at the mayor's office with Todos al Parque, which is the civic participation mechanism that we've developed through this program, in which citizens have really appropriated the parks, and because we started with them from the design process, and citizens are able to co-design and work with us from the very beginning. And this has really boosted the way we do our projects, not just on parks, but in other areas too of the city administration. Siembra Barranquilla, as I was telling you before, this is when I was telling you that we innovated in the way we do governance, in the way we conduct ourselves, this is a good example, because Siembra Barranquilla it's a program, but it's also now a mixed public-private entity that was born as a result of the renewal of the parks and green spaces in Barranquilla. This was in 2017. And now we have this public-private entity that has a 53-hectare tree nursery about an hour and a half away from Barranquilla, where we plant the trees that later are moved to the parks. So that when we move the trees to the parks, they're already between 3 and 5 meters tall. So this has really boosted the way we can build parks and do it quickly, because we have this facility, this tree nursery that can grow trees that are endemic and of the tropical area of Barranquilla. And another thing that when we're talking about governance was the creation of this public lighting company. This was previously completely privatized. Lighting in Barranquilla was completely privatized, and now by switching to a public lighting company also around 2017, we can guarantee that the entire city has lighting and that we can respond quickly when there's a failure, so to speak. And this has been key for the parks program, because the parks, if you've ever been to one of our parks, they're all very well lit, and these lights are all LED lights. And the entire city of Barranquilla, 100% of the city is all on LED lights. So how can other cities replicate this public space renovation model? I think one key aspect of our success has been that we've had a long-term public policy. You don't have immediate re-election in Colombia for local authorities. So it's always a challenge that every 4 years, the person in charge is changing, right? But this has a project that has transcended that, and it's been going on for now 4 administrations, and there's a huge potential for it to continue because it's become very popular with the community. So by boosting civic participation, we have guaranteed that citizens ask for parks for their leaders, and that it ensures continuity and that the parks are maintained across time. This is basically how we're organized a bit internally. As you can see, I won't go into detail, but we have an agency, the district's infrastructure agency, which acts as the technical coordinator, and they bring together all the different dependencies, whether it's security, whether it's the sports dependency, whether it's the public lighting company. They bring them all together to establish these coordination teams to make sure that the parks are well maintained. And I was telling you a bit about how the participatory process is very, very, very important. I cannot stress that enough. We usually, for example, on the left side, you'll see a preliminary design that we show to a community, and then after several back and forth meetings, community leaders would participate, and we would end up with something looking more like the one on the right side. For example, they wanted to expand the children's playground, they wanted to include picnic zones, they wanted to have an open gym. So we included all these aspects in the design because the community was asking for them. Of course, everything within the realm of what's financially possible, of course. And here you'll see a picture of the community participation that we do when we're designing these parks and co-designing them with the community. And of course, we have a team of park rangers that we didn't have before, and they are the coordination team makes sure that these guys are doing the proper work, and they are employees of the district infrastructure agency. And this importance of local resourcing, I think, is very important to highlight as well, because we are making sure that the plants we're using, that the technology we're using, that the people that are being employed are all based locally. Some awards that we've won: the Malecón, which I mentioned, has won several awards for infrastructure. Barranquilla has now been a tree city for, I think, 3 consecutive years because of all the investments the city has done in tree planting. And of course, a lot of this is in all these parks that I've mentioned. And the World Resource Institute prize that I mentioned at the beginning that we just won a few weeks ago. And I just want to end on this note, how Todos al Parque is now paving the way for more advanced civic participation exercises within the mayor's office. And I think this is my biggest lesson learned, and something that I think that is really at the heart of the project, because public parks have empowered how citizens and the public administration can work together. And now we are taking this model, and we're not just doing it for parks. Now we have a strategy called Así Vivo Mi Barrio. So this is how I live in my neighborhood, which is using the same participatory model that we use for the parks program. And now we're doing it with citizens to plan how they envision their neighborhood. So the entire neighborhood, not just the park, but also if there are problems for the citizens, very evident problems that the local administration needs to know about. These are the sessions and the places where we're doing these exercises with the community. And now we are, and with them, we can do a type of planning, so to speak, a 10-year plan for each neighborhood. So if a neighborhood leader, the leaders come to us and we have a meeting, and besides the parks, they identify several problems, for example, lighting or insecurity or whatnot, lack of access to a primary school. We can prioritize with them, and we can tell them what can be done in the short term, what can be done in the medium term, and what can be done in the long term. So that citizens are aware and they are being listened to. And this is something that we learned how to do it on the on the run, you know, by practicing with the parks program. We learned how to do this properly, and now extrapolate it to other areas of the work that we're doing at the city. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to tell you about, and I'm very happy to present this. This is a wonderful project, Aurelie, and I'm happy to take questions whenever you guys want, and happy to share this experience with you guys later on at the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manuel. I think we are all very impressed by Barranquilla's experience regarding Todos al Parque in so many more projects that you have in the city, and that we could visit with the IURC Latin America team last October, and we were really glad and impressed by everything that you are doing. I think it's very important to see how you manage to overcome big challenges that many Latin American and also European cities have regarding to maintenance, to continuity, to actually engage the citizen in a way that they actually reclaim these spaces and ask for more from the public authorities. And I think this is a very, very nice example. So maybe I'm opening up some minutes if someone have a question from our panel, from the audience. If you don't have any question for now, you still have time to think about it, because I'm sure that you still have a lot to ask to Manuel and to learn from his experience. So if you don't have any question now, I think we can continue with the presentations and then have some discussions later. Okay. So now we're going to have the presentations from Fortaleza. First, we will have Victor Macedo, who has a master's in transportation engineering and a degree in civil engineering from the Federal University of Ceará, as well as an undergrad from the École Centrale Nantes and an additional training at Johns Hopkins University. He worked for 7 years in the area of urban mobility and road safety at the Fortaleza City Hall, and also coordinated the sustainable accessibility plan of the city. He's currently vice president of the Foundation for Science, Technology and Innovation of Fortaleza, City Nova. With Victor, we also have Luciana Mendes Lobo, who is a lawyer specialist in administrative law and process with a master in conflict management in law. She conducted research in the area of digital governance and consensual solutions of conflicts in public management. Luciana is currently in charge of the Secretariat of Urban Planning and Environment. She also worked as executive secretary for the Secretary of Tourism of Ceará, and was an advisor on economic development, agriculture, and water resources management. In April 2018, when she took over the head position in the Control and Ombudsman Office of Fortaleza, she became the first woman to hold the position in the Secretariat's history. So now, Victor, Luciana, if she wants to start sharing your presentation, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eli. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here presenting this practice here in Fortaleza. Thank you, Eli, Edgardo, and all the IURC team to provide us this moment. And also thank you, everybody who's watching now. I'm going to share my screen. Just one moment. Can you see my screen? So I'm going to start. I just have 5 minutes. So just a little context from Fortaleza. We are the 5th biggest city in Brazil with 2.7 million people. And we are starting to present the microparks projects here for you. The microparks are public green areas that were once degraded areas and now are being transformed into public space, providing access to nature and urban environment in our city. So our main goals with the microparks are the expansion of Fortaleza green areas, the creation of new green space for the population, also the encouragement of environment awareness cities, as well as the improvement of walkability and neighborhood infrastructure. So in summary, with the microparks, we intend to transform abandoned areas like this picture in areas like this, in qualified space for coexistence with nature in our city. The microparks, in the microparks, we use two kinds of elements. We use elements from traditional squares, which are elements already existing in other cities, squares that the people demanded as, like sand courts, open-air gyms, banks, playgrounds for children. But the innovative actions are the naturalized elements. So in microparks, we add a new concept of outdoor space with more contact with nature and experience for citizens of all ages. So some examples of naturalized elements are, you can see in those pictures, we use like pruning waste in the land, wood elements for to build play for children. We consider the existing water resources, the natural land, and also the topography. So we intend to preserve the area to implement the microparks. And this is an action built with a lot of hands, the public government, in this case, the city hall, the municipality, also the universities, the private investment, and of course, the civil society. So as I said, it's a project made with a lot of hands, with a lot of partners. I can mention each one due to the time, but we have some national and international partners for this project. And so in Fortaleza, we have about 300 areas. We looked for it with more than 400 hectares, which have the potential to receive the microparks projects. It can be areas like this in this picture, small areas that were once degraded, or like this one. And by 2024, we intend to implement 30 microparks in Fortaleza. We already started, we already implemented 2 microparks as a pilot project in order to test the concept of different contexts, to define the methodology, to identify scalability and economic viability alternatives. So I'm going to just show you some pictures from the 2 first pilot projects we implemented here in our city. And just a little step by step, we start with the land identification. Then we move to a diagnosis of the area with data survey, technical visits. We contact the local actors also. Then we move to elaboration of the preliminary proposal, local visits with the population, and finally, executive projects and the interventions, the workers. So the first one was the micropark José León. It was a degraded area with a lot of waste in this place. These are a before picture. That these are the space. And now he's like this with a lot of plants, place for kids, naturalized elements. This is some pictures during the intervention, during the implementation and after. We can see also some elements from traditional squares, like the gyms. And the second one was the Seu Zequinha micropark. It was biggest area with water resource inside in. So this is a picture for before. We made a lot of public hearing, community meeting. It is very important in order to identify their needs, their expectations from the project. So we work together with them. And now before, it was an area with a lot of waste, especially construction waste, during the implementation. And after, we have space like this. We can see some before and after. These are the micropark Seu Zequinha currently. We have a lot of children playing in contact with the environment. So it's important to say that the microparks were a pioneer project in Brazil, and we have already received national and international awards for this. And now I'm gonna give the word to Luciana. And before that, I would like to share with you, it is important to our discussion. Yesterday, we had the International Day of Forests and Trees, and we made, I guess, the largest simultaneous tree planting action in Brazil. We planted 2,023 trees at the same time in our city. So we engage a lot of people from different departments in our city, public school students in different places in our city. And all this action was planned and coordinated by Luciana and her team. So I just wanted to share this with you and say congratulations to Luciana. So I'm gonna give the speech now.
Thank you so much, Vito. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see how you presented our project, because it's so good to see how it began and how it looks right now. And you can go forward, please. Vito is going to help me to show the presentation, okay? So one challenge every public sector faces is how to fund the projects and how to fund our wheels. And we had a very good chance to talk with Banco Mundial, which is called World Bank, or it's different from place to place. And we already had a project with them. It was on the go. And we showed them our experience with our microparks, and we asked them if it was possible for them to fund the implementation of 30 more experience in our city, because we really thought and understood that it was a good thing for our city. And they said yes. And then we were able to have much larger speed in implementation in our city. So from the first micropark until the micropark number 30, it will be like 3 or 3.5 years between them, which is something wonderful for our city. So we are in this process right now. We have went through a bidding process. It's over now, and we are starting to implement the first 10 of the total of 30 ones. Vitor, you can go on, please. And so you can see a map of our city, and as you can see, we are making sure that all the city has microparks. We don't want it to be isolated in just one area. It's something more like a public policy, and therefore it's really important to make sure that it touches the whole city. It's important to say that our Mayor Sarto, has a very strong look at the environmental cause. So when we asked them if he agreed with this public policy, he said, yes, go for it. And if you need anything with me, like a support or a negotiation, I'm here to help you guys. So it's important to say that for every policy we want to implement, it's absolutely important to have the support, the political support of the leader. And we are very grateful at our mayor for he is giving all the support we need. We can go forward, Victor. So as Victor said, the main goal is to transform degraded areas. So we had this very specific look to make sure that we were dealing with public areas, because we don't want to buy land from anybody. We just want to work with public areas. And we have this very good link with schools. So we want the children to be the first people who are going to use those parks, because therefore we understand that the families will come and they will make sure that those parks are very well maintained. We can go forward, Victor. So we are going to show right now some examples of lands we have chosen to implement the microparks. Here it's at the neighborhood Siqueira. We can go on. We have another one here. Let's go. We have this one at Janguru Sul, which is a very famous neighborhood in our city. So what we did in this year, we had this diagnosis. So we went in the streets, talking to people, making sure we knew the place we wanted to implement the micropark. We had to talk with the locals to explain to them what we wanted to do. And we had to also understand from them what they wanted from the area, because sometimes we think something is good, but they have another position, another idea for the area. Let's go, Vita. And we also, since we are aiming to engage children in this project very much, we had a lot of workshops with them. So they are very much anticipating the implementation of microparks in their neighborhoods. So what is a good thing when we talk about a public policy is that we can implement or make the inception of an idea with our population. So now we have some microparks experiments, community experiments. So here we have a residential condominium. And then we also have a private elementary school who took the idea of a place to play with more natural elements, which is the main idea of micropark anyway. Let's go, Vita. Here you have another picture. I like this one in the left very much. Let's go. And that's it. What we want to say is that we are very excited with this public policy, and we can hardly wait to talk to you guys again by the end of this year. And we are going to show you that the plans we had, the dreams we had came true. And we are be able to show you, I think, that 15 unities of microparks. So thank you very much for everyone who's here. And if you have any question, me and Victor, we are here to help you with any question.
Thank you so much, Luciana, and thank you, Victor. I think everybody was also very impressed by the experience of Fortaleza. It's very interesting to see how you could manage to put together so many elements and find a great solution, because in the end, it's not only about greening the city, it's also about engaging the children, the population, increasing the participation of different levels of society, and also the regeneration of degraded areas, which is really nice, because as you showed us, some areas were full of garbage or different kind of elements. So it's also a very, very nice way to ensure that there is a great public space that is taken care of by the cities. Is very, very interesting. I think we already have some questions in the Q&A, but maybe to wrap it up together and have a general overview of everything, I will now give the word to Jonathan to present a bit more the experience from Essen. So then we can have more time to chat and to answer all the questions, okay? So Jonathan is a process engineer and that started his career in the chemical industry. He did further education to become an environmental inspector. His daily business is in the Lower Emission Control Authority of the municipality of Essen. So Jonathan, now the floor is all yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Aurelie, and the speakers we have already heard. I want to share my screen and want to show you how we try to design parks a different way. We changed the topic of tiny forest, and I want to show you our first steps we make with tiny forest. And a short agenda. First of all, I would like to explain you what is a tiny forest and why you should plant them. Then I will show you a typical design of tiny forests. Afterwards, I would like to say some words about our plans. And then I will show you 2 examples on how we implemented so far and what are our expectations. So first of all, what is a tiny forest? The idea comes up in Japan by an ecologist called Akira Miyawaki, and his idea was to recultivate the cities. And to do this, you need many different plants, species, which are used in a tiny forest. And the main characteristic is that these tiny forests have a very high density. So 3 to 7 plants are planted per square kilometer. This is a very high density in compared to a commercial forest where you had maybe 1 plant every 10 square kilometer if it's a really big tree. So this is a very, very high density. And this is important for the good growth of a tiny forest because of a high density, the plants have a competition for light between each other. And so these tiny forest has a potential to grow very fast. It says that a tiny forest can grow 10 times faster than a normal forest and up to 30 times denser. Yes, and as you can imagine from the name, a tiny forest is around the size of a tennis court, could be a little bit less and could also be a little bit more. The idea in Europe came up from our neighbors in the Netherlands first at 2015. And you can see in the pictures only 18 months later, the forest starts to grow and has a very dense view. Yes, on the next slides, I would like to give you 3 good reasons why we should start to plant tiny forest. First of all, is it meant to be a method to strengthen biodiversity and climate adaptation? Because it's a home for insects, birds, and small mammals that needs this dense vegetation. And a very important thing for us is it's a green place in the neighborhood to get together and learn about the nature. So you can use synergy effects of having a great urban environment and also educate our children the right way how to treat the environment. Tiny forest has normally a typical design. We added unique elements to make them more attractive for the citizens. It's usual to build a path through the tiny forest or around the tiny forest so you can see and explore the tiny forest better. And of course, it's important to add some benches near to the tiny forest to rest down and just enjoy the mini ecosystem in urban regions. Yes, before we want to implement tiny forests in Essen, we should have a plan. So we decide we want to plant species of the native vegetation to support our native animals. Our planting areas should be around 200 to 400 square meters. The density should be around 3 plants per square meter, so that we have the competition for light between the plants, but we don't have that high need to fertilize to keep them growing. So it's a small act to stimulate the plants to have the competition, but not to have such a high maintenance in fertilizer. We want to include natural forest constructions like herbs, and around the forest plant some small bushes, small trees, and high trees in the middle. And we have the idea to plant some fruit plants around the tiny forest to higher the acceptance of our general public. It's important that the tiny forest has a fence for the first 5 years around, so we prevent people from stepping on the young plant and keeps dogs out, and even to prohibit vandalism. For us, it's important to use natural materials for fences and information boards to look nicer and give a good round opportunity. And small passes from the edge to the middle of the forest so that our classes can study every planting zone. And this I will explain later on a more detailed plan. It's also very important for us to using straw to cover the ground, so we prevent undesired plants to grow, and it's able to keep the humidity, so we don't need to have that high maintenance in the beginning. Yes, now I would like to show you the first example, impression from our park at the Hausbergestraße, which is around about 300 square meters. And this is a map where the tiny forest is going to be planted. And first of all, we thought about it's a good idea to have a tiny forest here in the middle, in the center. But because of problematic that we don't want people to step in, we decide later to not plant the tiny forest in this square. You can see here, we decided to use this surface to plant the tiny forest. And this is what the planning looked like. We have this interesting shape, and we have different plant zones. Here you can see our path we want to have through the tiny forest. And the idea behind is that in the plant zone 1, which is about 60 square kilometers, we want to plant high growing trees, round about 170 trees, for example, oaks. In the next zone, the planting zone 2, which have a size about 100 square meters, we want to plant 330 plants, which are not that high growing, for example, field maple. And then we have this planting zone 3 around the tiny forest, or as an outer zone of the tiny forest, where we want to plant bushes and not so high growing plants like red and black currants. And here on top, we want to make a little place where we can seed some flower and herbs to look it a little bit nicer and give a better experience for our classes who join these tiny forests and have a better impression of what you can grow. Yes, to improve the participation, we do some events where we involve citizens of the residential areas, school and kindergarten classes, and doing these events to inform the public and help people to identify with the local area. We organize planting events with interested citizens. So we want to speak to the children, that they speak to their parents and are proud of their own planting. And this happened in an event where we created micro tiny forests, so the children can get the idea behind. And when the real tiny forest is going to be built up, they can move the tree they already planted to the real tiny forest and then see how it goes on. And yes, this is an ongoing involvement of local schools and citizens initiative in the project. The participation is possible by watering the plants and providing social control, which is very important. And we don't expect this large number of interested citizens took part in the planting event. So we had many volunteers who joined our session when we plant the trees and build up the tiny forest. Yes, this is a very actual picture, how it looks from yesterday. As you can see, we are not finished. We already planted the most trees, and we have this not so beautiful fence around, which will be replaced with a more wooden fence, which is more beautiful, but it's important to keep them sure at the moment. And you can see these colorful things on the trees, which are from the children who have planted the trees and can go back and show, here was my planted tree I did plant on myself. Yes, now I want to talk about our studies and experience and our expectations. Although there are many countries in Europe that have been using this method for about 10 years, we think there is still a lack of studies which effects the tiny forests have, especially on biodiversity and climate adaptation. So we try to fix this lack and involve many or some universities to study and monitor the whole project, especially in climate change, biodiversity, and social science. And to improve that, we initiated a network of neighboring cities in the local region to exchange experience. We want to be a first role model in our region that tries to implement tiny forest. And all in all, in 2023, we want to grow up to tiny forest. What is very important to us is use the synergy effect of close to nature education, which means it is not only the fact that we make small ecosystem in urban regions, we also want to combine it with the education so that we can figure out how important the close to nature education is in the near future. Okay, sorry. Yes, this is our second example with some impression from the Kapitel Visus 35, which is an area about 400 square meters. And this is a very good place because it's near to a school. And as you can see, it's an area where the sidewalk goes through. So if the children go to the middle school for 5 or 4 years, every day when they walk to school, they can see how their tiny forest is growing. And here are some last impressions from the project, which are also very actual. These are pictures from yesterday, where we did some preparation of the ground to bring some materials in it to have the trees the best start possible. And I think it's a great opportunity to create some small ecosystem in urban regions and use synergy effects of climate adaptation, strengthen biodiversity, and make a close to nature education. Yes, in the end, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope if there are some questions that I might get through.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. You did a very good presentation with a lot of preparation. You read especially yesterday for us to see how it looked like, and we were really glad of it. And I think it was a great presentation to conclude a bit the session before starting the Q&A session, because we could see also a different experience from Europe, that it has a lot in common with the two previous one, because it has a strong educational element, but it's also different because it's not a micropark but a tiny forest, which is, as Jonathan told us, very focused on biodiversity and dense environments, which is also a very, very interesting experience. So I won't talk too much because we have many questions to answer, and I think this will be the most interesting parts, and I would like to try and answer them all before we finish our time. So I think maybe to start with this Q&A session, we can answer Pablo Yanez's last question, because it's something that has to do with all three experiences, and that also interested other participants in the chat. I saw other comments related to that. So Pablo asked about the ownership condition of the sites used for parks or forests, if they are private, public, and what are the conditions of buying or managing such spaces, what are the laws and the legal conditions in the different countries for accommodating these types of initiatives. This is the question. I don't know who wants to start telling us about this.
So in the case of Fortaleza, just to start, we build our microparks in public space, in public areas, so we don't have any difficult in buying or expensive or some lands.
In the case of Barranquilla, it's very similar. It's all public land owned by the city hall, the mayor's office. What we have seen, though, recently is that you're seeing private area land that's been donated to the municipality because the communities are asking for parks, and now we're seeing that private actors are donating the land, small lands, but for parks, they're donating it to the municipality. Or you see foundations who have a land and they're not using it. We talk to them and they end up donating the land to the city. And then once it's public land, the rest of the process is pretty straightforward.
I think our tiny forests are in public places too. But when I inform about the topic, I hear from the first tiny forest in Germany, which is also possible on a private place. So I think it depends on the circumstances, but ours are on public places.
Okay, thank you to all three. Now we could turn around to Manuel, because we have a question from Alberto Ruiz for Barranquilla's project. So he said that Barranquilla's project is great, as we could see in the study visit, because Alberto is from Malaga and had the chance to visit Barranquilla and work closely with them. And he is asking if you have a particular program to engage children in the schools and participate in the green areas design.
Yes, and we have two things. With another institution called Barranquilla Verde, we have a program with schools precisely to those who have parks nearby. They can help in the co-design process. So if there's a public school near the park, we have a specific program so that children can participate. But it's very local and very, it's not yet applicable to most of the parks. It's very limited. And now what we're doing is with our friends from Rome, that I see that they are here in the webinar, with our urban gardens initiative, what we're doing is we're thinking about productive parks. So now that parks are going to have a component where people can grow their food and their organic foods, so vegetables and plants. And the design process, we're doing it with kids from the local schools. So I think that program is tying into this Todos al Parque program, in which we're having a specific courses for students and specific initiatives within the schools to engage children to appropriate the space and to design, and the mayor's office is receiving the designs from the kids, and we're trying our best to help it become a reality, so to speak. So yes, there's a specific program for that, but it's very recent and very new.
Thank you, Manuel. This is not a question from the audience, but I think it's a good bridge from what you said, because I know that in Essen, Jonathan, you're also planning on planting fruit trees in your tiny forest and to involve the children with local schools directly. Maybe you can make a small comment about that, the Essen situation.
Yes, this was our plan to strengthen the acceptance in the citizens, because if they have the possibility to see that fruits are growing, and kids are always very curious, and if they see, okay, next to my schools are growing berries and fruits, and maybe one time I can pick it, so they will be more interested in the whole thing, we hope.
That is good, Jonathan. Thank you so much. Now we have a few questions from Annika, our colleague from Essen, that are directed to Barranquilla. So maybe Manuel, you want to take that. So the first one is about how long does the design process take on average from planning to completion, and how much human resource does it tie up during this time? And the second one is, she said that maybe there are many different ideas due to the possibility for so many people to participate, and it is certainly difficult to take all interests into account. How is ultimately the decided, and how exactly the park will be designed? So about the process of design and participation, I guess. Can you maybe answer that, Manu?
Yes, and I'll start by the last one, and I'll tell a little bit more about the participatory process, because it starts with surveys that the city, the mayor's office, conducts around these public spaces, and then the co-creation begins between citizens and the mayor's office, and then based on the surveys, we have a pre-design and we present it to the community publicly in an event at one of the areas where the park is going to be built. The community comes, they ask questions, they propose changes, they say, no, what we need is actually a soccer field, we don't need an open gym, for example. And we negotiate back and forth actively on the ground, and it'll last like a couple of hours. And then the mayor's office presents again a new design that incorporates the changes, and then the community, we do like a symbolic act where the community signs on the map, all the community leaders sign on the map, saying that they're all happy with the final version that incorporates their changes. So we try to make it a very back and forth process where we listen, collect information, then we have a pre-design, then we show it to the community, and then we incorporate the changes, and then everybody is on the same page. So that's how we manage to do that, to make sure that all the needs are taken into account. Of course, there's always going to be a few things that we cannot do. If you're going to ask for a huge swimming pool in the middle of the city, then it might not be possible. But we try to work and with the community. And usually, what we've noticed is that it's very specific to the areas. For example, like some areas have asked us for bocce for disabled kids, because there's a center for kids with disabilities, and they have asked us to incorporate that into the park, and we did that for that specific park. And then there are some other ones where you have young adults where they want soccer fields, so we invest in that. So it's all depending on specific situations, but what we've seen is that the community as a whole is also very realistic of what they can expect at a park, and all the needs are met in that way. And then regarding the other question, I was asking my friend for support, but roughly it's about 8 months, the entire process. So in planning and design, it takes 2 months. And then the public licitation, is that how you say the public call for, how do you say that? The call for,
it's a bid, the bidding process.
The bidding process, exactly. That lasts a month and a half, and then the building the park and doing the intervention is around 4 months. So give or take around eight months. From planning to completion, and that's been pretty institutionalized by now. At the beginning it was slower, but now since we have done more than 260 parks, now it's pretty ingrained in the way we operate, and that's about the time that it takes.
Thank you so much, Manuel, for your great answer. We also have a really interesting question from our colleague from Hermosillo in Mexico, Antonio Colin, that asks, before you started your interventions, how did you demonstrate or justify that your projects would have a positive impact? How did you track such impacts? I think all of you have more or less the same question open. Maybe you can start Fortaleza, and then we can follow with the other one.
I think that in Fortaleza, we have a very interesting way to implement new projects, because Vito works at City Nova, and they have this concept to make the pilot. So you can implement a pilot one. You can understand in this pilot if what you were thinking of, when it touches reality, it makes true, the dreams come true, you know? And then I will let Victor speak about this a little bit more. Then when they finish this process, they ask in this case, it was the place that I work, and he comes to us and says, okay, we have this public policy. This is so good. Let's go. Let's make it work for the whole city. Talk about it, Victor, please.
Yeah, exactly, Luciana. That's the importance of the pilot process. It is during the pilots that we identify also the problems of the project, but of course the benefits of the project. So we always make some before and after surveys, interviews with people and citizens who lives around. And it is important to validate the project. And of course, we measure and we monitor some indicators, something like crimes around the microparks, number of plants or trees planted. So all these indicators, we're going to start to measure air quality in these areas. So all these indicators and all these surveys and interviews helping us to validate and to convince the mayor to expand and to invest in this project.
Thank you so much, Victor. I don't know if Jonathan or Manuel, you want to share something?
Yes, I think before you start such a project, it's always a little bit risky because you don't know how it's gonna end. And in our case, we have a good dialogue with all these stakeholders, especially the kindergarten and school, which are very near to our tiny forest. And there we have a very, very positive feedback from the children, from the parents, from the teachers, and have also a very good PR and good advertisement. And this shows us that we are on the right way because the topic is getting more and more important for the citizens. And it's a topic for all of us. And so we think we notice that because of the positive feedback, we are on the right way. But it's always risky, I think.
I was muted, sorry. Thank you, Jonathan. Manuel, I don't know if you have a last comments before we get to conclusions.
No, I saw the question about how you measure, how to ensure a positive impact, and how did we track the impact. And I think that's something that we learned how to do along the way. At the beginning, we had no idea that this program is going to become so big and so important for the mayor's office. At the beginning, we had very low expectations, so to speak. But then when we saw the success, we immediately asked ourselves, how do we start measuring impact, and how do we make a case for this, not only for Barranquilla, but for other cities in the world. And I think what we did to measure, for example, the impact on security, that was extremely important because it really changed citizens' perception of security in Barranquilla. And the type of things that you could do at a public space completely flipped the switch 180 degrees. Before, these were gray, desolated areas where micro trafficking was prevalent, where there was poor lighting, nobody would even cross the lots, the empty lots, because they were considered unsafe. So for us, it was very important to measure that because the community expected an impact on that. So we went out of our way to measure that, and I think that's important to track the impact that you're doing. I think next steps, obviously, we want to measure the impact on health. And I think we've had a couple of calls with the World Health Organization to see how we can do that, especially because during the COVID pandemic, when people were in their houses and they couldn't go out. And one of the first places where they could go out was parks. And we saw how having these public spaces were crucial so that the city of Barranquilla could quickly reactivate and restart both socially, culturally, and economically by having these spaces available where we could, for example, do vaccinations there for COVID and all types of vaccinations for kids, for example. We can do activities for the elderly so that they can move and practice a hobby or practice a sport. We can do makeshift markets where we can bring locally produced foods to the parks and people can buy them directly there. So we learned a lot along the way, and we have seen how the impact is far bigger than what we initially thought. And now the challenge is going to be to measure that and make a really good case to document it and make sure that this is included in some way in the literature of the benefits of these green public spaces.
Thank you so much, Manuel. I think this is a good concluding remark because we noticed in the 3 experience how you could learn along the way of building sort of a small pilot project and then learn how to involve the population, learn how to improve everything, learn how in the end the population is the citizens are asking for this kind of intervention because they are so beneficial and they have a very significant and tangible impacts on the quality of life in cities, you know. So I'm really, really glad that we could have such a great panel to talk about this important topic. And I had planned to do a different conclusion, but I read some comments in the chat and I think they have better words for the conclusions than I do. So if you allow me, I would like to read two comments that I really appreciated. The first one is from our colleague Ronnie Hall from the DG Regio, that said that the famous German-British economist Schumacher in 1973 coined the phrase, "small is beautiful." Exactly half a century later, we have mini, micro, tiny parks and forests. He would have been proud of all of the work, especially for its human scale and decentralized nature. I think this is a very beautiful comment that summarizes a lot of our learnings today. And finally, we also have someone else that commented that when I was little, I dreamed of a park close to home. It is good to know that many children will have the opportunity not only to have them, but to co-create them. A round of applause to all those who make this happen. So I think these two comments can summarize all the learnings that we have today. We will share the presentations with you, and we will also be available if you have any questions or want to be in touch with our wonderful panelists in the future. So don't hesitate to get in contact with us, to follow IURC Latin America on social media, to keep this conversation going, because we still have so much to talk about and so many questions to answer. So I would like to thank you again to all our panelists for your time, for the participants that joined us and that contributed to this very interesting debate and conversation that could highlight some very, very important points for the replication of these experiences, because IURC is also about this kind of learning, how to replicate in a concrete manner best practices and adapt them to the local context. So thank you very much for that. I have one last thing to ask you. When the webinar will end, you will have a small survey pop up on your screen. Please answer it, just 1 minute, and it helps us to improve in our webinars. So I hope to see you all very, very soon in our next webinars, and I wish you a nice Wednesday.